Yeah, so you're a big Game of Thrones fan. I'll totally admit I've never read any of the books, and I've only watched like the first season of the show.
What?
So
that's crazy. If you would have said first 5 seasons, I would have been like, okay.
Yeah, I'm like a total. I don't really know a whole lot about. I know just enough to like understand the premise, basically. But so, couple of questions, which we'll let you decide how much you want to go into this. How did you like the adaptation from the books to the show? And then how do you like waiting for him to finish this last book?
So I knew of Game of Thrones before it came out, but I didn't want to read it because I wanted to watch the show first. So when I knew they were making the show, I set my reading back. I was like, I'm going to watch the show and then read first, because it never translates well from when you read to write. And,
Right.
There's all kind of algorithms that go into that. It's pretty much impossible. More possible with shows and movies, but it's still never going to be the same, especially because they want to be original or whatever. So I watched the seasons first, and I thought, they're great TV. And then I read all the books real fast. I read all of the books in, I don't even know, 6 months, I think. The books are obviously way better. You have more characters, you have way more depth, and George R.R. Martin's world building is the most incredible thing I've ever experienced in my entire life. I've never seen something so thorough, well crafted, and like sensible in a fantasy world, I guess. And I just think what he did was marvelous, and all the characters are different. So the books are way better. And as far as waiting, I'm not the biggest fan of how long it's been, but I also don't believe in pressuring an author to kind of like put out crap work, because I know he does take his job seriously. He's not one of those authors that's just going to publish 25 books in a year because he wants to.
Yeah.
He does take his craft seriously, and also the dude's where we all wish we were, so I'm not going to judge. He's got contracts with HBO. He's got contracts with everybody doing all this stuff, and he's making money and getting his legacy out there. I'd be, if everybody was like getting after me, I'd be like, listen, I'm doing my thing out here. I'm getting my shows made. I'm doing all this. Like, I'll write the book, but I'm not going to do it for you guys. I'm going to do it for me. So I actually respect him, I think, as an author. For that, do I wish he would do it? Yes, because I want to read it. But as someone that wants to be where he is, or at least even halfway where he is at some point in my life, I totally get it. And I actually respect it more than just dumping some garbage out there just to appease the people.
I totally understand like people being frustrated about it, but at the same time, he's been getting a lot of crap, like undue. I think not warranted in that. Sometimes things just take time, especially if he's trying to wrap up this whole big series that he's created this monster of a thing. And if he wants to actually wrap that all up in a satisfying way, it's going to take time.
And I'm sure all that pressure's got to be terrible, especially after your show comes out and people see the ending. They're like, no, that can't happen. That sucks. And like they're tearing it apart from what the writers did. That's got to put some pressure on an author to be like, well, man, I got to make this thing like, it's got to be spot on. Not that he strikes me as the type that really cares what anybody thinks, because he doesn't seem like he does. But I'm sure at some point you don't want to just ruin your series that people are waiting for. So I'm sure that's got to be crazy.
Yeah, definitely. What other influences do you have? Like if he's one of your favorites, what are some of your other ones that influence your writing?
Redwall for sure, I think. Just because of what it did for me when I was young. And I actually just reread them all, and they're actually pretty graphic for being a young kid's book. Other than that, of course, shout out to Tolkien, because he's the godfather of all of us. Without him, we'd be nowhere. What else? The Scythe series, pretty incredible. I love Tad Williams as a writer, but other than that, I actually read a lot of historical fiction. And, some of my favorite novels are like Uncle Tom's Cabin and Anthem by Ayn Rand. So nothing that really is too long the line of mine. So it's kind of just a big mashup.
Yeah. Yeah, I of course I love Tolkien. No one's going to be surprised about that. I'm a big fan. I actually just got the last. They put out the History of Middle Earth books as like box sets. There's like 4 box sets, so I just got the last one of those in the other day, and so now I've got like 15 books to read of all the history of Middle Earth. But
that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm super pumped about it. So there some of it's a little bit of a slog because it's Tolkien's a little slower writer, and but I I it's kind of like the George Martin thing of like the depth of world building and that it functions and makes sense, and like yeah, it's just super cool.
Yeah, especially for him. I mean, doing it back when nobody else was doing it. I
Yeah.
will say Edgar Allan Poe too. He's an influence on mine because I really like his shock factor and the craziness of his writing. I
Hmm.
do think that plays a role in some of my writing because I did study him in university, and I like how he just kind of. I mean, he was crazy in general, but I love just what he did with some of his writing.
Yeah. What as a writer for you, what are some of your challenges and even ways that maybe you stay motivated and disciplined to write?
My challenge would be focusing long enough to do it. Luckily, I can write 2 chapters in a half hour because I type really fast, and when my mind
Hmm.
is going, it's going. Unfortunately, with that comes a lot of spelling errors because I'm typing too fast sometimes.
Hmm.
I think my biggest issue in general is I have a lot of hobbies, a ton of hobbies. I never really sit still for long enough to do anything. I'm mountaineering, I'm hiking, I'm traveling, playing basketball, going to the gym, going to work, doing yoga. I never really stop. So
Hmm.
the hour and a half I sit down during the day is when I get my writing done typically. But I mean, I admire Stephen King for his whatever, I forget what his writing regimen is. But I know he writes for like a half hour every day or whatever it is. I admire him for that, but I don't like holding myself to that kind of schedule. I think writing needs to come when it wants to come.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you're putting out forced fluff. And I think that's why a lot of writers face writer's block because they pressure themselves so much to do it. For me, I want it to come naturally. I want it to come from inside of me, and I want it to translate to the page. I think that's how writing comes out the best, in my opinion, is when you're feeling it, your writing is going to reflect that. If you're just pushing it and forcing it to work, I don't, it's like trying to force force your fist in a little pinhole. You can do it all day long, but if you're not, it's not going to always pan out very well. Maybe a giant hole in the wall.
Yeah. Yeah, I always tell people I long a few years ago I got totally away from like having a word count goal. Like, you always hear that like have a word count goal for the day or whatever. And what I found is that just was driving me crazy because I was like I because you can control sitting down to write, but you can't control if you're going to actually have like creative ideas and energy that day because some days it's better than others. So I found that it's way better to be like, okay, I have a half an hour or an hour or whatever it is. And I'm going to sit down for that amount of time and focus on writing. Now, some days I might get 10 words and other days I might get 1,000 words, but it's just better. It's better than trying to force yourself to put out words that go nowhere.
I've always been a big hater, not gonna lie, on Twitter, on threads, I've always been a big hater on word count because you can post that you wrote 40,000 words today, but are 39,000 of those words good? Do
Mm.
they make sense? Are they? I mean, if you sit down and you write a paragraph and it's an amazing paragraph, good. If you can sit down and write 10 pages, then also great. But
Mhm.
I don't think word count really dictates anything as an author, other than whether it's a novel or not by the end of the day. But yeah, I think I really try to avoid look. I don't even look at my word count because I don't want to know how much I wrote that day. As long as I sat there and I got what I wanted to get out and I don't feel like I have anything left, that's good enough for me. And like you said, whether that's a few sentences or whether it's 5 chapters, I mean, whatever comes, comes, and whatever doesn't, doesn't. But it's much better to me than putting just a bunch of words down and then having to edit them out later because you're trying to reach some kind of goal.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think about that too of like, I mean, everything you put down, you have to edit. So it's like, am I creating more work for myself or not? And then it just, I don't know, like you can't control creativity. You can't control when you're going to have good ideas or it's going to really be flowing. And so you can just type a lot or so basically just found that I was like literally making myself feel insane of like I wouldn't hit that 1,000 words even if I worked at it for like an hour and then I would feel bad for not hitting, like it just starts that whole cycle of, not
Yeah,
feeling good about yourself.
I think it really gets to people and makes some people crack. I did it for a second. I was like, oh my gosh, all these authors are putting their word count. What am I writing? And I was
Hmm.
like, no, I don't care. 'Cause I've never been a numbers person. I'm like, yeah, whatever. But I can see how it drives some people crazy, and I've seen it, on social media. People are like, "Oh my gosh, I couldn't write today," and it's like, that's okay. Give yourself a break. It's fine.